Chair, we're now ready to start the meeting.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the meeting of Planning Committee. I am Councillor Doreen Purvis and I am Chair of this committee. The government has temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold meetings in person during the coronavirus pandemic. All local authorities have been handed new powers to hold public meetings virtually. This meeting of Planning Committee will remain accessible to the public as it is being streamed live on YouTube, whilst ensuring the councillors, officers and the wider public are able to follow government advice by staying at home to stop the spread of the virus, to protect the NHS and save lives. Our support officer, Sean, from Strategy and Democracy, will ask all members to confirm attendance.
Thank you. Councillor Brady.
He's there.
Councillor Brady? I can see him there. Councillor Boyack.
Apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Present.
Councillor Flynn. Thank you. Councillor Hetherington.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Hobson.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Kilgour.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Leask. Councillor Maxwell.
Present.
Councillor McHugh. Councillor Paul Milburn.
Present.
Councillor Jeff Milburn. Councillor Proudlock.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Taylor.
Present, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, my name hasn't been called.
Sorry, I've missed it. Sorry, Councillor Amor.
Yeah, present.
Thank you.
Thank you. As mentioned, we've received apologies from Councillor Boyack, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Leask and Councillor McHugh. We also have the following officers virtually attending this meeting: Peter Cunningham, Operations Manager for Development Management, Helen Lynch, Senior Planner, and Ben Broom, Principal Solicitor. I will outline the procedures for today's business. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it isn't possible for members of the public to attend the meeting in person and to speak during the meeting. So instead, the Council has introduced a system where a resident may provide a speaking statement to be read out during the meeting by a Council planning officer. So in terms of the procedure for today's planning applications, Peter Cunningham from the Council's Planning Service will start by presenting the item to members, and afterwards Helen Lynch from the Council's Planning Service will read out any speaking statements. Peter will then be asked whether he has any comments to make in response to those speaking statements, and the application will then be referred to members for a decision. Speaking statements from both the applicant and the objector have been received in relation to the first application at 94 Reading Road. 4 speaking statements from objectors and 1 from the applicant have been received in relation to the second application on the agenda for the proposed pontoon at Long Row. These speaking statements will be read out in full by Helen. Councillor Angela Hamilton, ward member for Beacon and Bents, is unable to provide us with her speaking statement due to her disability. She has therefore joined our meeting and will be speaking for 5 minutes in opposition against the proposed pontoon development. Members would usually have the right to move a site visit on an application on giving reasons. However, committee site visits cannot presently be conducted in a way that ensures compliance with the government guidance on staying safe outside the home. The position on committee site visits is subject to ongoing review, and they will begin again as soon as practicable. The committee are reminded that most applications should not require a site visit, with the committee papers covering all relevant issues. Planning officers are currently only presenting matters to committee where, in their opinion, the committee papers enable the members to reach a final decision. So if we now move on to the agenda and ask if there are any declarations of interest. No. If there are members need to declare any interest in the nature of it, and if at any stage they feel they want to declare an interest, they're able to do so. So if we now move on to item 2.
Chair, excuse me. Sorry, Chair. It's not actually a declaration of interest, but the first application in Reading Road is actually in my ward, West Park. Similarly with Councillor Hobson. I don't know whether we just need.
Sorry, it's Ben Broom. That's not an issue. That's fine.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, we've got the next item is item 2, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 14th of December 2020. They've been circulated to members in advance of the meeting. Are they agreed to true record?
Move them, Chairman.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's very cooperative of you. If we can now move on to item 1, which is a planning application for 94 Reading Road, South Shields. The speaking statements are to be read out by Helen.
Chair, I'll begin my presentation. Shall I first before this?
Right. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
I'm trying to get it over with quickly. Sorry for excluding you.
Okay.
I'll bring in Peter to deal with the applications.
That's
okay.
Simply just to introduce members to the application, to the item. Obviously, they've had the agenda now for a while. 94 Reading Road, South Shields. This is the planning application for a bedroom and a bathroom extension to the side and rear of the property. The application has been reported to the planning committee as the objector has submitted a speaking statement to us, which will be read out in a few moments by my colleague Helen. The applicant has also submitted a speaking statement, which will also be read out. So if members could turn to the plans held at the rear of the committee report, starting with the first plan, which is the red line planning application site boundary. On this plan, what we see is the application site is a 2-storey semi-detached property. It backs onto the objector's property, which is highlighted in green with a green marker. The extension will go on the northern side at first floor, and it will extend to the rear towards the objector's property. The objector is concerned that the proposal will cause a loss of light and overshadow, affecting their rear kitchen and dining room windows. So if members could turn the plans, the pages, plan 1 to plan 6. Plan 1 in particular, this shows the front elevation of the proposal. Now the front wall has been set back and the ridge line has been set down, so that arrangement is in conformity with our visual amenity policies, as we consider that development is subordinate to the host. So turning to the neighbouring amenity concerns to do with the loss of light and overshadowing from the rear kitchen and dining room windows. If members could turn to plan 3, turn the page. It shows the rear projection of the extension at first floor. And plan 4, which shows the general arrangement of the site with the first floor projecting towards the objector's property. This drawing, it's an architect produced drawing. It shows a dimension of 8.6 meters from the proposed rear wall of the extension to the common boundary with the objector's property. If members will note that there's a window in the rear elevation of the bathroom. So this bathroom window will have obscure glazing, and we've suggested a planning condition which seeks to ensure that this obscure glazing is carried out on site and that this window is fixed shut and non-opening up to a finished floor height of 1.7 metres. We've done this in order to safeguard the privacy loss from the objector's property, given the relationship of the development to his property. Within the report, we say that so in terms of neighbouring amenity, within the report we say that the proposal will be offset at an angle away from these ground floor habitable windows, leaving adequate spacing to ensure that this neighbour's amenity won't be harmed by the development. There are two minor errors in the report, Chair, just for the minutes. The first is in paragraph 3.8, and it refers to refers to a gap of 3 metres between the objector's windows and their boundary. When in actual fact, this distance is the objector has just confirmed that this distance is 2.4 metres. Apologies for that. We've taken that 3 metre dimension off the ordnance survey plan when it's actually measured by the objector to be 2.4 metres. And also in paragraph 3.15, there's a minor error. We'd say the 2-storey rear extension would project 2.79 metres, and actually it's written on the drawings that it would project 2.8 metres. At the rear of the plans, there's obviously photographs showing the application site, front, rear, side, but the photographs 6 and 7 show the objector's rear windows. But as I say, we consider the development to be acceptable because it's offset at an angle away from these windows, and it still leaves a distance of 8.6 metres to the boundary, with another 2 metres, 2.4 metres on top of that from the objector's boundary and their kitchen windows, dining room windows. So the recommendation is to approve the application, Chair, for the subject to the schedule of planning conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. We'll now hand over for the speaker's statements to Helen.
Thank you, Chair. The following statement has been received from a resident of Lismore Avenue in objection to the planning application. I am incredibly upset reading the report enclosed with this planning application. The report states that the first floor extension will not impact heavily on the light that my property receives. I can't stress this enough, that the loss of light, although mentioned only on a morning, will impact heavily on my lifestyle. Unfortunately, I do not get light all through the day due to my property not being south-facing, but I do not feel it is fair or just to disregard the light I do get at my property because it is only morning sunlight. This extension is going to drastically decrease the light that my property receives. As mentioned in the report, I get the light through a gap between the 2 properties, and this extension is going to halve the gap I have available. Your report states that the boundary lines are 3 metres away from my property. However, this is not correct. The boundary is actually only 2.4 metres from my property. Therefore, if this measurement is not correct, I can only assume that the measurements quoted in your report are also inaccurate and that your proposed extension is going to be closer again to my property than mentioned in your application. My other main concern of this extension is privacy. As mentioned in your report, it may be a condition that obscure glass is required on certain windows, but I do not feel this is going to protect my privacy. Due to the rear projection of the side extension, I feel once the windows are open, there will be a clear visible path into the rear bedroom of my property. The window of this can be seen in photograph 6, provided in your report, and also visibility into my kitchen and dining room as a result of looking down through an open window. Here ends the statement, Chair. I shall now proceed to read the statement received from the applicant in support of their application. I wish to put across my points below in relation to the objections raised. In response to light entering the property, As the official report states, the property at 7 Lismore Avenue is overshadowed in the morning by the existing host property, and that by mid-morning, the proposed extension would have no additional impact due to the orientation of the two properties. In observations in recent weeks, it is noted that when light does shine into the back of the property at 7 Lismore, the resident in fact fully closes both blinds to block the light from entering into the back of the property. It is therefore my view, which is also backed by the official report, that the proposed extension would have minimal to no impact on loss of light into the property at 7 Lismore, and feels this is not grounds to object. In relation to the distance of the property at 7 Lismore Avenue to the boundary line, the objector is quoted as saying, "I can only assume that the measurements quoted in your report are also inaccurate." I am not in a position to assume whether these measurements were taken by the architect, a representative from the planning team at the council, or from the official location plan. However, I would not be in a position to make the assumption, as the objector has, as to what the exact measurements are, and I have put my complete trust in the experience of our architect and the planning team within the council. With regards to privacy from the rear window, that part of the extension will indeed be an ensuite, and as a result, it would 100% have obscure glass window to maintain privacy for my family and our home. It is noted in the report that the windows shall be fixed shut to a level of 1.7 metres above finished floor level. This is something that will be followed to a minimum of 1.7 metres, so to maintain privacy for my family and our home from the rear bedroom and bathroom of the property at 7 Lismore Avenue. We are already in a position where the property at 7 Lismore has windows in the rear, which not only overlook our garden, but also has visual of the bedroom, bathroom and living space at the back of our house. As a result, any windows we install in our proposed extension would be installed with privacy for ourselves being of paramount importance, as well as to avoid privacy issues for all our neighbours. Having read through the report provided, we will be adhering to every recommendation given to ensure it fully meets the requirements for this proposed extension and to be granted planning permission. And based on the guidance of the official report, we feel the objector does not have valid grounds to oppose the plans. Here ends the statement. Thank you, Chair.
Chair? Chair?
Right, thank you. Something went wrong there.
Okay.
Thank you, Helen. I'll now bring in you, Peter. Is there anything you want to say about those statements?
Just one issue on those statements, and that was the reference by the applicant in terms of the observation that he had noticed that the objector closes their blinds. That is just an observation, and to be honest with you, it's irrelevant to the planning decision-making process whether or not the blinds are open or closed. What our planning good design is about making sure habitable windows are safeguarded. Yes, with every development there is going to be an impact, but obviously what the planning committee must do is obviously assess and give weighting to that impact in the decision-making process. So obviously the reference to the blinds being closed or open is irrelevant, really. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I'll now open it up to the committee for any questions or contributions that they may have. Does anybody wish to speak? Does anybody want to move?
Chair, could I
Chair.
ask advice? Chair,
Yes, yeah.
could I ask advice, please?
Yes, certainly, Bill.
I didn't get into the meeting till after Peter's first presentation. Does that clear me to vote, or should I abstain from voting for that and that through that?
I'm not really sure on that, Bill. I suppose it depends how you feel about it. Is there any objection, from a legal standpoint?
Sorry, Chair. It's Ben Broom again.
Yeah.
Councillor Brady, I mean, the question for you really is do you feel you have heard enough information to properly, obviously you've read the report,
Yeah,
and you've heard the speaker statements. As long as you feel you've got enough information before you to reach a proper decision on it, the fact that you haven't heard Peter's, all of Peter's presentation of itself, I wouldn't say that disbars you from taking a decision, as long as you feel you've got the information before you.
yeah, I've read all the presentation
Okay.
in the report. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Chair.
Councillor Brady. Councillor Hetherington, sorry? I'm not sure who was speaking
No,
there.
sorry. I think Councillor Milburn Jeff Milburn indicated that he would like to speak as well.
Okay, Councillor Jeff Milburn.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Right. Put things in perspective. I do believe that the loss of light with regard to planning law is not an issue. Am I right or wrong with that?
Chair, if it's Ben again.
Right.
I think what Councillor Milburn might be referring to is a slightly separate issue, which is rights to light. The impact from the loss of light is capable of being a planning consideration, and Peter obviously in his presentation has outlined, the scope of that assessment. The legal principle of a right to light is a separate matter.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else wish to speak? Does anyone want to move?
I move it.
Thanks, Jeff. Anybody second it?
Seconded.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Can we go to a vote, Sean?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Purvis.
4.
Councillor Brady.
4.
Councillor Dean.
4.
Councillor Hetherington.
4.
Councillor Hobson.
4.
Councillor Kilgour.
4.
Councillor Maxwell.
4.
Councillor Paul Milburn.
4.
Councillor Jeff Milburn.
4.
Councillor Proudlock.
4.
Councillor Taylor.
4.
Councillor Amor.
4.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That is agreed unanimously. Thank you. And we now move on to the second planning application for the proposed floating pontoon on the river adjacent to Long Row, South Shields. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you said, this is the proposed floating pontoon, which will be installed, which is proposed to be installed on the River Tyne near Long Row. The application is reported to Planning Committee as we've received speaking statements from both the objectors and from the applicant. And Councillor Hamilton will be speaking to us directly in a few moments in opposition to the proposal. This is a very detailed committee report, Chair, and we've set out all relevant planning considerations, and we've listened to what has been said by the consultees, and particularly the local residents and the third parties. But members of the committee haven't taken these comments on board. Members of the planning committee are aware that planning applications obviously must by law be determined in accordance with our planning policies and our development plan, adopted development plan. Ward councillors Hamilton and Francis share the concerns of residents, particularly in terms of the impact upon residential amenity and upon highway safety. I've also received an objection from Market Dock Residents Association, which was submitted. I received this after the committee agenda was sent to print. The chair has agreed that I read this out, this objection out. So this is what I intend to do. So It's a written statement and objections from the Market Dock Residents Association. Dear Planning Committee, I write to you on behalf of the 79 members who have joined the Market Dock Residents Association. There are 150 homes on this small estate, 6 of which are empty. We also represent 300 plus members who have joined our Facebook group. I will try and keep our comments concise, and I have summarised them as follows. Under the header South Tyneside Local Development Framework, obviously with limited time to speak, we cannot go into as much detail as we would like on how this development goes against your own local development framework core strategy. In summary, it goes against your own recommendations in so many areas. We have printed them off and highlighted all the inconsistencies. Some examples include creating sustainable communities where people choose to live, preserve our beautiful coastline and countryside, enhance the natural environment. It is dividing the community at Market Dock. Civic pride is not being instilled here on our estate. It goes against so many spatial objectives. It goes against policy ST2, sustainable urban living. Delivering economic growth and prosperity, in particular, paragraphs 4.3, 4.44. Delivering sustainable communities, paragraph 1.1 and 1.3. Policy SC3, sustainable housing provision. Sustainable communities, policy SC6, paragraph 5.21 and 5.22. Capitalizing on environmental assets, and policy EA5, environmental protection. We have so many comments on the South Shields Town Centre and Waterfront Area Action Plan, November 2008, or Development Management Policies, December 2011. We cannot include them now, but we will make sure they are included in the call-in process if permission is granted. One very important point, however, is the proposal's inset map, key improving accessibility, which shows that a proposed footpath cycleway will follow along the entire riverside. And this goes against this fundamental proposal by closing part of the river off. Other objections for floating pontoon: 1, the developer does not own the land and or the water he will build on and has no right to rent it. A floating pontoon is not a marina and does not benefit the area or the needs of the residents. 3, why authorize a change of use from residential to commercial when the residents do not want it? 4, Ian Malcolm said a marina would be built at Holborn as part of the town's 365 plans, which would be purpose-built. 5, health and safety concerns have been raised regarding access to the pontoon via a ladder, which would be unsafe, and the access provided to emergency services without the fire brigade. 6, many concerns have been made against parking, as the estate does not have visitor bays and it's permit parking only, including disabled residents. 7, the lack of amenities and toilets is laughable when people urinate on Broad Landing Promenade. And 8, we already have issues with antisocial behaviour and are trying to get a public space protection order, and 24/7 operation of a boatyard is poppycock. Lastly, under the header England Coastal Path Long Distance National Trail, access to section SBA-1-SO31 South Bents to Shields Ferry was restricted when construction of a 2.1 metre high security gate was placed without any planning permission, fixed to private property they do not own. How has this happened? ? The path was approved by the Secretary of State in 2017. The land was maintained by the council until recently, when the streetlights were cut off. And once a highway, always a highway. Why are the council paying an independent consultant on behalf of Natural England to reopen the path? You may say the Town and Country Planning Act is the only law that needs to be considered during today's Planning Committee hearing, but we disagree. What about the Countryside and Rights of Way Act 2000, Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009, and the Highways Act 1990? The council has so far refused to agree that the two issues are intrinsically linked. We have so far received over 1,000 signatures on our petition to reopen public access to the river at Market Dock, South Shields, which I have attached, but we will not stop until this popular public right of way is now reopened. So this morning I received the petition, Chair. I don't subscribe to Facebook, but we received the petition. In the opening page of the petition basically says, recipient, National Trails Officer, South Tyneside Council. And then letter, it says, greetings, open public access to River Tyne at Market Dock, South Shields, dear sir or madam. We are writing to you concerning a section of the England Coast Path, which I believe is called Section 10 and follows the coastline and riverside from South Bents in Tyneside to Amble in Northumberland. Since February 2020, an important stretch of this very popular route has been closed. The route was blocked when an 8-foot steel gate was installed with a sign declaring South Quays private property, no public access or right of way. And the signs on the lamppost changed direction, diverting visitors from the true national trail. We have contacted the council's public rights of way officer at South Tyneside Council to ask why this important right of way was shut, and we were advised we needed to complete a DMMO application form to modify the definitive map and statement of public rights of way. We then discovered the route was already on the Ordnance Survey map, and we have made 5 calls to the right of way officer asking why we need to complete this form when it is already part of a national trail. Please could you provide the residents committee with support at AMP guidance so that everyone can enjoy our beautiful natural environment again. Kind regards, Market Dock Residents Committee. So obviously the petitioning, Chair, to keep an area of the path or reinstate an area of the pathway open. This has come in on the back of this planning application. So turning back to the committee agenda, Chair, well, what I would start with is the description of the development. In other words, what the applicant is applying for. So if we can do that, it's a bit of an obvious one, but if we can start, because it's very important, if residents are objecting against the planning application, we need to understand exactly what is being applied for here. What are the committee being asked to determine? So the proposal reads, installation of floating pontoon and wave break with access ladder. There isn't any reference to a closure of a pathway in there. Such matters will be dealt with by the highways team. So if members could then just turn to the plans at the back of the report. There is the red line planning application site boundary. That's what we start with, plan 1. This shows the red line of the planning application. Obviously, it shows the objectors' properties and it shows the supporters' properties in relation to it. The proposal is to provide a floating aluminium timber polystyrene floating pontoon on the River Tyne, and it's going to dogleg or propose to dogleg around the existing walls of the dock. There's a wave break section on the western side, which will extend out of the entrance to the dock, and it will be bolted. The structure of the floating pontoon will be bolted to the dock walls. The residents are right, the applicant doesn't own that land, but he served notice on the landowner. That's a requirement of planning. You can apply for planning permission on somebody else's land as long as you notify the landowner, because planning permission runs with the land. The issues around consent from landowner and things like that really are a separate matter from the planning decision, because obviously it's a civil issue between the applicant and whoever the landowner is to obtain that consent. So there is an ongoing dispute regarding the closure of a pathway, and that is on the northern side of the dock. There's a pathway. Members will be familiar with this. I know some of you have already been down there and had a look. Long row cuts through the dock, and the junction with Long Row and the land on the northern side of the dock, a gateway has been put, or a fence has been put to prevent public access from entering this area on the northern side of the dock. Now, the section of this planning application has been included within the red line, and within that, so if we turn to plan 2, within that, there's a second fence proposed on the inside of the existing perimeter fence, and also there's an access ladder with security fencing around it. That's that section of disputed pathway there. But what this committee is doing is determining, basically it's engineering works, determining the planning application around the actual structure, the development, which is the floating pontoon on the river, the bolting of the structure to the dock walls, that sort of thing. This dispute regarding the pathway started a couple of years ago, and my highways colleagues have already investigated the concerns raised by the residents regarding the closure of the pathway, and they have concluded that the works did not represent a breach under the highways legislation, as the land which was enclosed did not form part of the public highway. So rights of access in general is not a matter for planning. We've granted planning permission in the past that has affected rights of way, and then obviously applicant must then go off and seek either a stopping up or a closure notice or a diversion notice under the highways legislation for that type of development. So in general, an agreement to access land should be done by relevant parties through agreement with the landowner, through restrictive covenant, or for a formal agreement under the highways legislation, not the planning legislation. So turning to the other plans, Plan 4, this and Plans 3, they just show cross sections of how the floating pontoon will be fixed to the dock walls. Then if we turn the page, image 1, it just gives a typical example of a floating pontoon. In this case, the actual fixings are different, because obviously the one in the image just shows a circle pole driven into the ground, into the seabed there. But our development will be, as I'm saying, be fixed to the dock wall. But just the illustration here just shows how that it's going to be sections of timber, aluminium framed, floating with the tide. And then on the photographs, we just show the dock, the surrounding area, and the last photographs we just pick up on the parking restrictions in the area already. It's already heavily traffic regulated, ordered with parking restrictions around that estate. Just picking up. So we have consulted the statutory consultees, and in the committee report, I summarise every written representation received. In the committee report, we set out these out against a detailed planning assessment against our planning committee, against our planning policies, our development plan. We've also set out the fact that we've consulted all relevant statutory consultees in the report. None of these consultees have any objections to this amended planning application. These include the Port of Tyne, the Environment Agency, and the Council's Highways and Environmental Health teams. Nearby residents are concerned that the proposal will harm their amenity, but we set out in the report that this is a commercial river and the houses will be well spaced away from the proposal. Planning conditions are suggested, Chair, that would restrict the construction times down for the development to within reasonable hours. And a planning condition is also suggested that would restrict the use of the proposed pontoon for the mooring of recreational leisure boats only. So approval of the application is suggested, Chair, subject to the schedule of planning conditions set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive report, Peter. If we could now move on to the speaking statements. And the speaker.
Thank you, Chair. There have been 4 statements received from 3 residents at Captain's Wharf and 1 resident at Long Row in opposition to the planning application. I shall read each in turn, followed then by the statements submitted by the applicant. Statement 1. I would like it noted how incensed I was to receive this planning information pack on Friday the 5th of March, when it clearly states all statements have to be in a clear 5 days prior to the planned meeting on the 15th of March, giving myself and others only 1 working day to turn all this around. This smacks of underhand tactics for sure. I would like to point out to the committee that of the 139 people in support of the proposed development, only 20 actually reside in the Market Dock estate. This is less than 14%, and as shown in the planning application, nearly all are in the new South Quays development, conveniently far enough away not to have their quality of life impacted on whatsoever. However, of the objections, 38 actually live on the estate. That is 42% of people whose quality of life will be greatly impacted on by this development. To say I was aghast by the way the council have stated that the public walkway, which has been gated off, and the planned development are not linked is incomprehensible, especially as when once the walkway has to be reopened, both South Tyneside Council and Mr. Turnbull, the applicant, will have significant health and safety issues going forward. In the report, it states in paragraph 3.58 that environmental health have ascertained that noise pollution would not increase, and by the nature of the commercial traffic, residents are already subject to this. However, I would like to point out that all traffic and noise are momentary as the Shields ferry and other commercial vessels pass by and are nowhere near as close to properties as this static proposed development would be. I question if South Tyneside Fire and Rescue Service have been consulted on the close proximity of potential flammable fuel and liquids to residential homes, some less than 10 metres away. I therefore urge the committee to reject the application on the grounds of the above, and also that the issues of waste removal be further investigated, that the noise pollution is grossly underestimated, and the reopening of the closed walkway be resolved. Here ends the first statement. Statement 2. Please find below my statement against the approval of the planning application being discussed. It is no surprise that out of the objectors and supporters listed, that the majority of supporters will directly benefit from the development, and that the majority of the objectors will be directly adversely affected by it. This shows an utter disregard for the residents of an established estate by those who have recently come to reside in a converted call centre. The fact that there is a significant new development mooted for Holborn proves, without a doubt, that this applicant wants only close proximity, but none of the disruption to his life. Nowhere in the application does it say that the fire service have been included in consultations. I would be very concerned to have an agreed development so close to home without their input. The issue about operating times whilst building work is ongoing is a nonsense. Of course, we would not expect disruption whilst it is ongoing, as we would with any significant building work. The issue we have is the longer term disruption right outside of our houses and at the bottom of our street. No one can see how the council deem the closed walkway and planning application to be separate issues. The council are going to have massive problems trying to unpick it all when the walkway is reopened. For this reason alone, the planning application should not be discussed at this point and deferred until this has been resolved. The council will face adverse publicity and reputational damage allowing this to go ahead. The council is aware of persistent antisocial behaviour along Long Row, yards away, yet deem this boatyard with boats moored long term as no risk to an increase in this sort of behaviour. The council states that environmental health do not consider that the noise pollution to be much different to the noises we already have living close to the river, but completely miss the point that the noise is short-lived, as this is from passing traffic, not from boats constantly going out and people working on them. Are we expected to just live with it? And are the council prepared for the constant complaints of noise nuisance and antisocial behaviour they will need to deal with? The issue of collecting and dropping off of waste has still not been addressed. Again, we are expected to accept that this will happen right next to our homes. The attempts to link groups like the North East Maritime Trust to legitimate usage of this boatyard is extremely misleading, and groups who may be coaxed into using it need to consider how much of a problem they will cause to people who actually live here. If the council is looking at investment for regeneration, then this applicant would be better placed regenerating the scrap land directly next to the flats, which is a constant source of litter and therefore pollution of the river. It is safe to say that this application and the applicant have divided a community which has been here for nearly 20 years, most being long-term. He has pitted the Market Dock residents against those who have just suddenly appeared in South Keys and created a them and us atmosphere. I therefore request that the planning application is refused on the following grounds. The fire service has not been consulted. The issue with the waste has not been addressed. The ownership of the waterway in the dock area has not been investigated. The direct link to the waters and workings of the dock with the ornamental ships has not been independently investigated. The existing repairs to the peninsula on which the Spirit of the Tyne stands have not been investigated. The noise and waste pollution has been grossly underestimated. And finally, the issue with the walkway and the necessity to have this walkway closed to allow the development to be successful should mean that discussion at committee should be deferred until it is resolved. Here ends the second statement. Statement 3. Prior to my statement, I wish to state that it is unacceptable to send a planning application pack to objectors 6 working days ahead of an action which requires 5 working days notice. It can be easily noted that the majority of those who support this application either do not live in the area and therefore cannot be adversely affected by it, or actually live in the flats owned by the applicant and therefore have an investment in its success. Those who live in the flats want the added benefit and kudos of having access to a boatyard, which is what this essentially is, without the disruption and health and safety issues. Conversely, the majority of those opposing it actually live in the area and will be directly affected by it. There remains significant health and safety, including noise pollution issues, which have not been addressed by any of the amendments within these plans. The fire service does not appear to have been consulted during the course of this application, and I would suspect would be concerned about a locked gate on the currently closed walkway. The issue about disruption to the neighbourhood whilst the initial work is going on is misleading. Most reasonable people would accept short-term disruption for a project. It is the longer-term disruption which residents are concerned about. The council deemed the walkway and the planning application to be 2 separate issues. I would disagree. One cannot easily exist without the other. Once the walkway is reopened, the applicant will find he has significant problems with the security of that area. Long Row is already subject to significant antisocial behaviour, which the council has not addressed, yet we are expected to believe that this development will not add to it. The officer's report states at paragraph 3.58 that environmental health do not consider the noise pollution to be significantly different to the usual river noise residents already have. This is fundamentally wrong. Usual river noise is created from passing traffic and is momentary. The noise pollution residents will now have will be day long and very close to their homes. None of the current vessels pass anywhere near as close to the homes as this development would allow. Environmental health have not considered the collection and dropping off of waste, which was mentioned in the original application. Paragraph 3.6 of the report states that the application should be considered as it adds to the regeneration of the riverside in line with policies ST1 and SS1. This is not regeneration. This is one man's private boatyard with a cynical link to the North East Maritime Trust. It would be interesting to see how much public use is taken up. If it were a genuine attempt at regeneration, he would have used the land directly next to the flats, which is an absolute eyesore and in serious need of actual regeneration, rather than spoiling an existing area in the middle of a quiet and beautiful estate in which he does not live. The applicant has now divided a community which was settled between those who have lived here for a number of years, are usually older and want to remain here, and those who have been here short term and who have no regard for their close neighbours. He has shown no attempt to understand the area in which we live and have lived long term, and a selfish disregard as he can get his own private pontoon and boating yard. I therefore request that the planning application is refused on the following grounds. The fire service has not been consulted. There will be considerable noise and waste pollution, which environmental health have underestimated. This will be a long-term issue, which agencies like the antisocial behaviour team, environmental health and the police will end up dealing with. A full investigation should include comparisons with similar developments and not based on assumptions and wishful thinking. The issue with the walkway, while the council deem these two separate ones, needs to be considered in light of a persistent campaign to reopen it. They need to consider how they would deal with the reopening of it retrospectively when they have allowed a private developer to build alongside it. The issue on its own should mean that this application is not discussed at this point and deferred. And finally, the issue of ownership of the waterways has not been fully investigated. Here ends the third statement. Statement 4. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my thoughts regarding this planning application. In essence, I am not against a marina if it is run efficiently and well managed and takes into account the nearness of residential properties. At this point, I must mention that part of our building is only 4 feet from the boundary fence located at the northerly quay, where pontoon A is to be located. I have mentioned this in a previous letter of the 16th of December 2020. There is an anomaly which is causing me some anxiety. I have paperwork supplied by the applicant that states the following: install pontoon berths over a phased period. The applicant intends to submit a full planning application seeking approval for the installation of pontoon A. Subject to satisfactory planning approvals, it is hoped to install pontoon A in the spring-summer of 2020, with the additional pontoons B, C and D to follow later, subject to detailed consultation and approval from the local authority. On the actual planning application, it states installation of floating pontoon, and I question if this is a singular pontoon and wave break with access ladder. Does this imply that only pontoon A will be installed, making it a private water sports venue for the residents at South Quay? It seems I am being pedantic, but I do have concerns regarding the following points. A, the nearness of our building to the proposed facility. B, how many pontoons have been applied for on the planning application? C, if all pontoons are approved, that they are all installed at the same time and not over a phased period which could extend into months of disruption for residents. If this planning application is approved, I would hope that the planning committee will ascertain a guarantee that all pontoons are to be completed, enabling the marina to function as a facility for all to enjoy and become an integral part of South Shields. Here ends the final statement in objection. Chair, would you wish me to continue reading with the speaker statement and do that for the applicant statement, or would you like me to pause and allow Councillor Hamilton to speak?
I think it would be better to pause and bring in Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I will resume after Councillor Hamilton has spoken.
Thank you, Helen.
Are you ready for me, Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking officers and councillors who made it possible for me to speak today by agreeing to my request for a reasonable adjustment. It shows a level of understanding of disability that the applicant doesn't appear to share. As a disabled person, it is clear to me that the applicant has given little or no thought to the needs of disabled people, not disabled people who may want to use the pontoon or disabled people living in the area. There is a brief mention of installing a hoist, which is immediately ruled out, but there is no consideration of what else could be done to help disabled people. Have they considered using tactile surfaces for visually impaired people, installing disabled parking for ambulant disabled people, or the location of toilets for disabled people who have conditions such as Crohn's disease? No, of course they haven't. Do they not realise that a visually impaired disabled person living nearby could be in danger from the loading and unloading near their pontoon? Do they think that every blue badge holder is a wheelchair user who won't need to be able to access their inaccessible pontoon? Do they assume that disabled people aren't interested in boating or sailing? Did they not think, or do they not care? Section 149, subsection 1B of the Equality Act says the council must have due regard to the need to advance equality of opportunity between people who have a protected characteristic and those who don't. Section 149, subsection 3 explains that this means removing or minimising disadvantages for people with protected characteristics and encouraging them to participate in activities where their participation is low. And section 149, subsection 4 goes on to state that steps must be taken to meet the needs of disabled people. As members of this committee, whether you care or not, you are legally bound to consider these duties. And as a disabled person representing other disabled people, including disabled residents in the area, I can say beyond any shadow of a doubt that if you approve this application, you will be failing to meet your duties under the Equality Act. But I'm not just here to speak on behalf of disabled residents, I'm here to speak on every resident who will be affected. Not the residents living in Whitburn, Jarrow or Hebburn for whom this will have no impact on their daily lives, but the residents of Beacon and Bents who it will significantly affect, and the residents who live nearby upon whose lives it will have a dramatic effect. The residents who live in closest to the proposed pontoon are already suffering a loss of amenity. The applicant has installed a gate at the end of a section of pathway that he claims to own. He's done this without permission, attached it to walls that he doesn't own, and has taken away residents' access to their own properties. They can't maintain and repair their boundary walls, they can't paint their terraces, and they couldn't even take part in VE Day and VJ Day celebrations by hanging pontoon on their own railings. The applicant is now proposing more changes, more gates and more barriers that will have an even greater impact on these residential amenities. The planning report says there won't be much increase in noise. How can anyone think boats coming in and out at all times of the day and night, the noise from the engines and the people on board won't increase the noise in a residential area? And don't forget the 10, 20, 30 or even more metal chains that are going to be used to attach the pontoon and the wave break to the walls and the boats to the pontoon. This isn't a Mediterranean resort or a sheltered cove. This is the River Tyne. The wind blows and the chains start to rattle. Storm Boris blunders in from the sea, waves rise and the rattle turns into a deafening clanking and an ear-shattering banging that goes on all night. Then there's the minor repairs and maintenance, which according to the MMO can include repainting, removing marine growth, resurfacing, and something I'm sure we'd all love to hear, sand and grit blasting. And what about the smell? Fuel and other fumes, not to mention human waste, because remember there's no toilets, will combine to create an amazing odour, especially if we're lucky enough to have a good summer. Can you imagine sitting in your garden 4 feet away when that's
Chair, there's 1 minute left for Councillor Hamilton.
To enjoy a picnic with your family and friends? But never mind, at least the kids will be amused watching the mice and rats that have been attracted by the rubbish that's been left behind. There are so many other issues to raise, but with only a few seconds to go, I'll need to be quick. The loss of the designated coastal path, which Coastal England weren't informed about. Are the docks fit to hold the wall of a pontoon? Dock walls fit to hold a pontoon? Who will repair and maintain those dock walls? What will happen if the walls in the road between the 2 docks are breached? Why have the emergency services not been consulted? There's going to be a massive amount of increased traffic, but no parking. There's a lack of facilities, including toilets, fresh water, lighting and electricity. I'm not against a pontoon or a marina if it's done right. It can bring a massive advantage to our borough, but this application isn't right. It doesn't meet the local planning framework. It takes away residents' amenities that they're entitled to. So please do the right thing and refuse this planning application. Thank you.
Okay, Helen, you can resume with your reading of the application of support.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair. The following final statement has been received from the applicant in support of their application. It can be seen from my submission documents that virtually every borough on the east coast of England, which has the geographical topography to support a marina, has done so in order to reap the plethora of benefits that can emanate from such development, including amenity and associated economic benefits. Indeed, the north side of the River Tyne will soon have its fourth pontoon-type marina facility once the now approved urban splash development at Smith's Dock site is completed, with over 500 pontoon berths between Newcastle City and North Tyneside. This application site represents one of the last practical locations that exists within South Tyneside for such a facility. In many ways, the old dock is the most suited for such developments, since this dock is a relatively modern construction, possibly the most recent built on the Tyne, having been completed in 1956 to relatively modern civil engineering standards in reinforced concrete at a cost of approximately £30 million in today's money, and it stands in superb condition. Most of the other regional docks that have been developed for marinas, such as Roker, Royal Quays, Newcastle City and Seaham, rely upon old stone wall docks dating back to the 1800s. Due to the backfilling and development of the many dock sites that once characterised the South Tyneside riverside, this location is rapidly becoming the final geographical possibility to create something for South Tyneside that will enhance amenity and the provision of leisure facilities on the riverside. With reference to comments under paragraph 2.4 of the Planning Officer's report concerning the Port of Tyne's awareness of this proposal, I would like to highlight the Port of Tyne's enthusiastic endorsement of the proposal. The following words that I shall read were received from the Director of HSE and the Marine Harbour Master at the Port of Tyne. Recognising also that South Tyneside does not currently have an alongside leisure mooring facility, we believe that the proposed scheme will enhance the leisure offering for both local and visiting leisure vessel owners. I am therefore delighted to confirm my support for this submission. Please note that these words were also included with the submission documents to the planning application. In addition to their knack for fostering fun and togetherness on the water, marinas serve one more practical purpose: easy and safe access to the waterway. Situated in an ideal location on the River Tyne estuary at an established dock, this marina would give its users the perfect opportunity to explore our sheltered waterway and idyllic northeast coastline, with plenty of spaces to link up with us as visiting points with the currently completed Newcastle City Marina and the forthcoming urban splash Smith's development and South Shields. This will effectively bring South Tyneside into this evolving recreational and leisure network on the river, providing a safe haven for water sport activities such as kayaking and rowing clubs. Here ends the statement, and that concludes all speaker statements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. You've done a great job. Okay, I'll now bring in Peter, obviously, to respond to the statements that have been made.
Thank you, Chair. As always, obviously with planning applications, we have to strike the right balance, but as I was suggesting earlier on, our hands are tied in terms of our decision making under the Town and Country Planning Act. Obviously, a lot of concern about the fencing off and closure of the pathway. I'm a little sympathetic, but in terms of the planning decision making, this has already been investigated by the Council's Highways team, and it simply isn't a planning matter. There's obviously still lots of concerns related to that, and as I'm saying, I'm sympathetic towards that. What we have got, though, in terms of the comments made there, we've got quite a substantial submission from the applicant Again, without sounding one-sided on this, I'm just presenting the application as it's been submitted. The planning department obviously are in this position where we can we need to make a decision on the application. If we are approving the application, we've got to set out our reasons. If we're refusing the application, we also have to set out our reasons. If the application is refused, then the applicant will have a right of appeal to central government, and those refusal reasons will have to be planning-based, planning policies, development plan-led reasons. We won't be able to refuse the application because of a highways of a breach under the highways legislation. But obviously the objectors are concerned about the closure of the pathway, and it could be that obviously they win their case and that pathway does have to be reopened. But that, if it is going to be done, it'll be done under the highways legislation, and we all know that obviously challenges under highways legislation can take a couple of years. But back to the submission that the applicant has provided, and again, we can only go off what is submitted to us. Right through this process, we've had this application since May of last year. We've kept the residents up to date. Every piece of representation they submit to us, we read it, have careful regard to it. We've summarised it and read it out at today's committee, and we give weight. That's why the report is such a lengthy document. We give weight to obviously each piece of representation made. Just in this instance, officers have recommended approval of the application subject to the schedule of planning conditions because the harm isn't significant under planning policy. It isn't sufficient for us to refuse the planning application on this particular in this particular instance. A lot of representation has been submitted to us, and my colleague there a few moments ago did read out the applicant's statement, and reference was made to the harbour master. I was going to do that also because what the applicant has done is provided a very detailed response to all of the concerns raised by the residents, including those raised by Councillor Hamilton. Pages and pages of a response have come in, basically providing an explanation around these issues. So the harbour master, Mr. Clapperton, he is in support, but he is also the director of the Health and Safety Executive and Marine Harbour Master on the river. And he basically finishes his letter to say, I am therefore delighted to confirm my support for the submission, recognising that South Tyneside does not currently have an alongside leisure mooring facility. We believe that the proposed scheme will enhance the leisuring offer for both local and visiting leisure vessel owners. Just in terms of sort of waste and refuse and things being discharged to river, obviously that would represent an offence on its own. It would be investigated either by the Port of Tyne or by the Council's Environmental Health. But interestingly, the applicant, who I've never met, the applicant has submitted a document here. He says in this that he is a founding member of one of the group's founders, makes pledge of the Riverside Project Group, and this Riverside Project Group basically is to gain a bit of responsibility for sections of the river that you have control of, to clean it up and to remove the plastic out of the river. On the issue of accessibility for disabled people, we set out in the committee report that it's an interesting proposal, land use by nature. On a boat, getting access to a boat is going to have its challenges, even for the able-bodied person climbing down ladders and up again. There's going to be risk assessments done to use the marina, and that'll be organised through the applicant. But the applicant has basically provided us with a paragraph already on accessibility. He says the proposal was submitted showing ladders accessing the pontoons. This was primarily on a financial basis. For the purposes of inclusivity, a gangway would be preferred, as this allows easier and safer access and thus improves the functionality of the facility for more users, especially the less able-bodied. Although initial supply-only costings have been provided by Walcon Marine accommodating a ladder access, we have some months ago requested comparison costs for the provision of a gangway in lieu of the ladder. They have been on partial shutdown, but we have this last week assured me we will have produced the new detailed designs and costings that will incorporate a gangway within the next few days. So in other words, he's looking at that. This is obviously a challenging land use, even for the most able-bodied person. Also, just finally, in terms of, in terms of the toilets, public toilets, the applicant also provided us with a statement that we all know that there's public toilets in the town centre, closest nearest the Wilco store in the square. Applicant has made reference to this, and other toilets further into the town centre, and walking distance of the marina. Safety concerns to do with the fire. Back to the description of the development, this is for a floating pontoon on the river. These concerns seem to come from the fact that the pathway is being enclosed. The closure of the pathway isn't part of this planning application because the pathway has already been enclosed. Now we need to be clear that there are 2 more enclosures proposed, and this is what I referred to earlier, shown on the drawing. But the pathway has already been enclosed. The first, it's on that northern section there. So the existing gate cuts across from Long Row, closing the pathway, but there's another fence proposed inside that, and then there's another fence around the access ladder for security reasons. Now we set out in the report that these 2 additional fences won't need planning permission. You could put them up, permit the development. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any more questions. To be honest with you, I'll be quiet now and let the members consider.
Thanks for that very comprehensive statement, Peter. I think you've separated the issues out and kept us informed as to, what the decision should be based around. So I'll open it up to members for any questions, comments.
Hi, Jeff. Yeah.
Yep. Yes, yes, Councillor Milburn.
Oh, yeah, okay, right. Thank you, Chair. What I will say about this is I think that if we turn down this planning proposal, we're letting down South Tyneside. For the reason why, if you go down to Roker Seafront, there's a marina down there, which has been there for a long time. And I know there was initial people saying that they didn't want this to go ahead, but I've used that marina and lots of my friends have. Now there's a marina down at Sunderland, right? There's a marina over on North Quays, and the north side of the river are doing all sorts of things. And what we need to do is here, and I'm looking at this plan, and simplistically, the amount of craft we're talking about. The smaller ones I would suggest are ribs, which are rigid inflatable boats used by dive teams or small yachts. And then there's 4 berths for maybe some larger motor yachts, right? And I don't see any problem in this. We're the only area, right? You've got it down to south in Roker, we've got it to the north in Newcastle, and go to Gateshead. And I don't see anything wrong with this proposal. It can only be good for South Tyneside. It can only be good for South Tyneside.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Maxwell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions for Peter. The first one is on 1.5. It's briefly mentioned about repairs. Is there any guarantee that there won't be any major repairs getting taken out, carried out there? Because that sometimes a boat might conk out and need major repairs, which would be a lot of noise, welcome maybe, something like that. And the second question for you, Peter, is lighting columns. It's going to be pretty dark there at night, I should imagine. I have walked past myself in the dark there, and it's not exactly very bright. Will lighting columns not be needed? And will they not cause light pollution to the local residents, please? Thank you.
Peter, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I can do, Chair. Valid points. Again, lighting columns will need planning permission, and when we obviously, if we get the applications in, there'll be obviously a health and safety issue that'll drive that, not a planning issue, whether or not extra lighting is required down there. But obviously, yes, we want to see the detail of that. We'd write to the neighbours in the normal way, and then we'd consider the merits of that and any overspill from the lighting, and consider the application on that basis. In terms of the question around repairs, You could also say this for lighting. You could say this for the operation of the pontoon if it gets permission. Our environmental health, they would respond, whatever the outcome of this application, they would obviously respond to any complaints made around a statutory nuisance issue. So let's say there was noise generated from repairs and things like that. They would investigate these. But it has to be said that on a floating pontoon, there's only so much you can actually do. It's likely to be very light hobby type works associated with it. Any works that you need to do the hull of the vessel, then obviously it's a dry dock arrangement, and the applicant does provide detail of that, of what would happen. They would have to go to North Tyneside for that, and other areas where it has obviously an area where we can get the vessel out of the water. So we're anticipating that it'll be very light in terms of the repair work, and that there wouldn't be any issues. But if there were to be issues, we have a response through our environmental health investigation team.
Oh,
Thanks, Peter. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Paul Milburn.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've got a number of points here that I'd like to. I mean, they've been covered mostly through the objections, but I'll just go through them one by one. I'll try to observe the profile of the objectors versus the supporters. It's pretty obvious that the level of acceptance within the nearby residents is not very high at all. So maybe a good idea, but probably the wrong location for me, in my view. I think it's incompatible with the residential area because we have already similar facilities at the ground, the sailing club, I believe. I don't know, but that's where I would be looking at. On the parking side of things, parking restrictions, yeah, there's a residential scheme in force down there. And I just, for the life of me, cannot see people carrying equipment, i.e. wetsuits and that type of equipment that you would need to run a boat from the public parking area, carry them down an access ladder. I just cannot see that happening at all. In practical terms, I just cannot see that working. And loss of amenity, and some of the properties are less than 10 meters away. Noise, it's been covered before, but I'm going to mention it again. Noise from creaking aluminium structures, wire ropes, chains, etc., etc. Noise from craft engines. I don't know if anybody's been close to jet skis and outboard engines, but how I understand that environmental health have had a look at this and estimated it would have no impact. I cannot see it. Again, waste disposal issues, but something that may impact at a later date is a property value, you know, with the noise issues. Something that hasn't been covered is the column and guide system that's described for to hold the pontoons to the wall. I haven't seen that anywhere else, and if you look at the manufacturer's brochure, it doesn't show this type of fixing system. And what would concern me is fixings to the wall against a constant to and fro of waves and tide of the integrity of those fixings. I would like to see a report on that, on the engineering spec, etc. And again, no fire and rescue assessment. I find that really strange. It was normally enclosed with this report. And finally, I hear what Peter says regarding the harbour master, his support, etc. The harbour master doesn't live there. So they're the points, all the concerns that I would have. I just don't think it's a good idea. Full stop.
Thank you, Councillor Milburn. Peter, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yeah, that's fair comments, to be honest. We feel we've covered them in the report. Issues associated with construction detailing for the pontoon. We have received quite a bit of information, but obviously the method of construction, we have to ask ourselves in terms of planning. It's public amenity and land use issues we're involved with. We wouldn't refuse a planning application on a construction methodology that was just flawed. So in other words, I'm not sure. So if Councillor Milburn thinks it should be done a certain way, or preferred engineering works.
Sorry, Peter, but I want to, I'd just like to clarify that. I mean, we would If it was a building and it didn't conform to building regulations, you would refuse planning permission, wouldn't you?
No, building regulations would. It's a separate piece of legislation.
All right, okay,
Yeah.
you're splitting hairs, but fair enough. It would be refused.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Sorry, Councillor Milburn. Yeah, the rest of it has just been covered. I think it's fair comments actually on the application, Chair. I'm not. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Anybody else want to ask any questions? Say anything on the application?
Yeah, I'd like to, Chair.
Sorry?
Jeff Muldoon.
Jeff, you've already spoken. Does anybody
okay.
else who hasn't spoken want to come in? Okay, go ahead.
I can
Jeff.
speak now, can I? Yeah, all I'm saying is just what I've reiterated before, that this idea about noise from boats, small boats, it's negligible, right? And, you know, when you've got further down, you've got South Shields Yacht Club, which is basically a yacht club, and there's a slipway there where you can launch boats. There's no suggestion at all of a slipway here. So you're not going to have vehicles bringing boats along and trailers and things, because they would go further down. We're talking here about an idea, the South Tyneside, to catch up with the rest of people and the rest of the councils around us.
Thanks, Councillor Milburn.
Thank you.
Anybody else got anything they want to say or propose even?
I would propose the motion goes ahead.
You're moving acceptance of this application. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Chairman.
Okay. I'll now ask Sean to call each councillor's name in turn. And can you please advise whether you agree or disagree with this planning application? Sean, over to you.
Thank you. Councillor Purvis.
4.
Councillor Brady.
Agreed.
Councillor Dean.
Agreed.
Councillor Hetherington.
Agree.
Councillor Hobson.
4.
Councillor Kilgour.
4.
Councillor Maxwell.
4.
Councillor Paul Milburn.
Disagree.
Councillor Jeff Milburn.
Agree. 4. Thank you.
Councillor Proudlock.
4.
Councillor Taylor.
4.
And Councillor Amor.
Oh,
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's 11 in favour of the application and 1 against. So that application is agreed. Can you note that? So the application is agreed. We now move on to item 4, which is schedule of pending appeals. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This item is just for information purposes. It's just a running schedule, provides me with an opportunity to just update members in terms of applications that are in front of the Planning Inspectorate of Central Government. Obviously, if we refuse an application or if planning conditions are imposed, or if we don't determine a planning application within the performance indicator targets set down by central government, then applicants have right of appeal. So 6 Seafield Terrace, 6A Seafield Terrace, we're expecting an appeal decision on that very soon. 199 Prince Edward Road, this appeal has been dismissed in favour of the council's decision to refuse the application. This was a policy decision in terms of too many hot food takeaways and too many hot food uses concentrated in one parade of shops. Tan Fantastic Ellison Street appeals just come in. We imposed a planning condition which basically tried to restrict the use to that applied for. The planning, the applicant isn't happy about that. I think what they wanted was a more flexible proposal so they could perhaps change it to something else without requiring planning permission. So that appeal's ongoing. The Mill Tavern, they put a container up already. We didn't determine the application within the performance indicator, so they've appealed against and gone for costs as well to the planning inspector of central government. Bywell Road number 4, appeal dismissed in our favour. 2-storey extension on the property is quite large and over domineering for the area and for the neighbours. 47 Shearwater, this appeal was allowed with planning conditions. We've attached the decisions at the back as well with Bywell Road. This is quite an interesting decision. We lost the appeal. I don't know if members are aware, but the Shearwater estate, we granted planning permission, Greenbelt. There was a structure planting area we wanted to maintain, but the structure planting failed. It's all about protecting Greenbelt and open land. The land became sort of part of the gardens. We imposed conditions saying, please don't put any detached structures in this strip of land, keep the separation from the houses in the Greenbelt. But what happened was this applicant has applied for a garden room, and I think it's the first of a few now which may come through for this parcel of land, which we tried to keep us open. Basically, the planning inspector considered that because the this section of land isn't Greenbelt, it's wedged between the housing estate and Greenbelt. But because the garden room proposal couldn't really be seen, the inspector considered that it was acceptable. The old Cooperage appeal lodged for this one. We've had a recent history of appeals at this site. The Greenbelt development, single-storey garage extension, 4 Woodside Drive, Bolton Colliery. This is an enclosure of a garden in a residential setting, which had been designed and laid out for open plan. We refused the application for retrospective consent. The fence has already been done. Residents objected to that one, and the applicant has appealed the decision. And then finally, this William Fox Hotel, it's an appeal against non-determination of the application. And we've just received another appeal, 61 Ocean Road, which is a HIMO for 9 bedrooms. This was heading to planning committee. We couldn't get it to committee in time. The application went out of time, 8 weeks performance indicator set down by central government. Applicants applied to the planning inspectorate on appeal for non-determination of the planning application, and they've applied for costs against the council on unreasonable behaviour. So that's in front of the planning inspectorate as well to consider. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that report. Are there any questions from members for Peter? Councillor Maxwell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On 199 Prince Edward Road, I hope the council uses this as some sort of precedence for further hot food takeaway applicants when we hopefully turn them down, not just at the Nook, but for the rest of the town as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Maxwell. Anybody else? Okay, if we note Peter's...
Councillor Kilgour had a hand up.
Sorry, Councillor Kilgour.
Thanks, Chair. I just couldn't get the mute off in time there. I would just like to say, Chair, with regards to the ones that are out of time, I think, I appreciate that developers do want to get their plans, through or heard at least. But I think we've got to be very, very mindful of these unprecedented times and the officers and the restrictions on them to be able to carry out the works, in accordance with the normal time frame. Whether that was the reason or not, I think this is a time to be a little more tolerant and understanding. And I just would thank the officers for their attendance this morning and the professionalism that they've shown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kilgour. I would add my thanks to Peter and his team. They're doing a sterling job under unusual conditions, and please don't think that we're unappreciative of your efforts. We certainly, do recognise what you're doing. Okay, if the committee could note that report. The final item of business is Chairman's urgent items. I'm sure you'll be delighted to know that I don't have any. So can I thank you for your attendance? This concludes the public meeting of the Planning Committee. The live streaming will now cease, And can I take this opportunity to thank any members of the public who've been watching.